So welcome everybody to this panel discussion that I am so super excited about. I can't believe that I've managed to get all of these incredible people in one space to have what I feel is such an important discussion. And we all know through the path of our work, and I'm going to introduce you all individually for our watchers and listeners shortly, but we all know how much of this conversation gets censored and how many distortions there are around being able to have open, free conversations about intimacy, pleasure, creative energy, sexual energy, and yet every human being is born with that in their systems and travels through life having very different experiences, maybe closing down, maybe opening up again, but often not knowing where to go with this dialogue. And yeah, Dee, you're a great case in point about that over in Northern Ireland, and we'll come to why that's so important, the work you're doing. But I'll go around first of all and welcome everybody and tell people a little bit about you for those who don't yet have the pleasure of knowing you. So Kian, welcome. Really, really delighted to have you here and to have your experience. And Kian is a leading somatic sex educator based in the US who is really teaching about how we can change neuroplasticity to support sexual healing and expanded pleasure in the system. And as far as I'm aware, Kian, you do this through bodywork, and I'm looking forward to finding out whether you integrate coaching or any other kinds of systems into your practice. And I think people will really love to hear that. I'm delighted to have you here. You have a wealth of background from your bio here on what you bring in. And there's this sense of, when I've seen your videos, there's this sense of joy and ease that comes into them around touch. And that felt really safe. And actually safety is one of the things that I want us to talk about today as well, because in most basic understandings of trauma, and we're looking at pleasure as well, where safety is a prerequisite for people to be able to open up. So it's very important. And Barbara Corellis, lovely to see you and welcome you here as well. I've got these here. These were one of the first explorations of my discovery of Tantra and led me into a path of healing my own story and my own background. And you are the founder of Urban Tantra Sacred School of Sacred Sexuality, and you've written books by the same name. And again, there's a playfulness in your work that I've always found really appealing. And there's one of our teachers says that if you can't play with something, it's got you. And I think actually play is a really important aspect of being able to unwind and unravel some of these stories. I'd also love to introduce Dee Larson, who has done phenomenal work, a really dear friend, and just the achievement of being able to begin to open up this kind of dialogue in Northern Ireland, in such a strong Catholic country where until very, very recently, and probably ongoing, there's still such a restriction on opening into being able to speak freely. And one of the ways that that really struck me was when I came to your place recently, and without breaching any confidentiality, there was a person in the group who expressed that they had never their whole life been able to bring their truth, their honesty, and the expression of who they were inside. And they were so moved by having the space for that small group of us that were in there to be able to do that, that it's just stayed with me. So really, you know, so proud of what you're doing over there. Thank you. And it's a pleasure to have you here. And moving down to Katie and Kian, who are both lead teachers on the UK sexological bodywork training. And I'm going to invite you to say a little bit about that, what that is, because it's very easy for us here to assume that people know what we mean when we talk about sexological bodywork or sexological approaches to healing. You each also do your own work. Katie, I'm absolutely fascinated to hear about the body poems, because it sounds to me like it's a kind of body mapping, again, of these stories that we hold in the body. And basically, we're all doing the same kind of work in opening that up, aren't we? Kian, you're a sexological body worker. Amazing. I'm going to be coming to all of you for sessions. And sitting beside me is my very dear friend and colleague, Sarah Rose Bright, who is a sex, pleasure and intimacy coach. And we do a lot of work together. We host retreats for women where we work together, bringing in a combination of shamanism, breathwork and sexuality. And we also work separately with these things. I'm more and more wanting to bring people like yourselves and Sarah into my work, because I see so much of it coming up through trauma release things like breathwork, and there's nowhere to go with it. People don't know who to talk to, they don't know how to express it, and if the facilitator isn't comfortable with that, it can be like having a very awkward conversation that sometimes actually leaves people in a worse place than when they landed in the space. So that was a big welcome. There's a lot of fantastic personalities here. And I'd love to go around and ask you one by one how you came to be doing the work you do. What led you into wanting to work specifically in these healing fields around sexuality, pleasure and intimacy? And perhaps I'll start with you, Kian, as I started with you in the introduction. Please feel free to share a little bit about your work.
Oh, thank you so much, Sarah. And yes, it's such a joy to be, or Steph, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you so much, Steph. And it's such a delight to be here with these wonderful practitioners and companions of my soul, including Barbara, who I haven't met before, but my healing journey led me to her work and to the work of Joseph Kramer as I was healing my own trauma late in life. And I felt a real calling to become involved in this field. It had been expressed earlier in life by stumbling around and working as a sex worker in from a less empowered place. But I found this work, and I just resonated with it so much, felt so much of my own healing and empowerment and capacity to move and choose more pleasure. And with that, yeah, it just kind of a convergence of all the pieces of my life that I could bring to work in the field, and then eventually become a teacher.
That's so beautifully put, that it's the convergence of all the pieces of your life. I love that, Kian. And thank you for bringing in the aspect of your previous work as well, in terms of sex work and being less empowered, because there's such a huge range of what people experience in sex work, which can be empowered. Let's not group everything together, but is often disempowered, which is how it was for me as well. And it took a lot for me to be able to find the voice to say personally, actually, that wasn't my experience. It wasn't very healthy at all. So how am I going to make this healthy? So thank you for bringing that in. Yeah. And Barbara, moving to you as well, I'd love to hear why you do the work you do and how you came to be doing it. Oh, you've gone muted.
Sorry. Yes. The AIDS crisis. I was looking for ways to have sex that were 100% safe, physically safe from the virus, emotionally nourishing, and physically exciting. And that wasn't possible during the AIDS crisis. But I started exploring Tantra and Taoist sexuality because they seemed to be focusing more on the energetic aspects of sex and a bit less on the genitals, which seemed logical for the times. The first thing I learned was breath work. The first thing I learned was a breath and energy orgasm, and which is a full-bodied orgasm achieved primarily by breathing. All my Christmases literally felt like they'd come at once. It was intensely physical. It was erotic as hell. It was emotionally clearing and spiritually enlightening. And I was altered for months after one experience. And why I do what I do, I want to make that experience and more available to other people.
Oh my gosh, that's just brilliant. And you've just reminded me, because I mentioned to you guys a moment ago that one of the bridges and pivotal points in my experience of healing my own story was at the International Conference on Prostitution many years ago in Los Angeles. And I had chosen to go to a workshop where it was all the service providers who were helping, you know, maybe give out condoms and take work with people who were really struggling. And in the next room to me, Annie Sprinkle was leading a workshop on energy orgasms, and I could hear all these people in the next room just using the breath and then going into these ecstatic states. I was like, I picked the wrong workshop.
Annie and I started at the New York Healing Circle together. We learned that technique together from the same teacher. So yes,
amazing.
Extremely fond memories.
Yeah, great. Yeah, what a wonderful thing to know that you wanted to experience pleasure and to go seeking, basically, ways that you could do that. Resourcefulness, you know, it comes in because we all, well, not all, but many of us have a natural desire to find pleasure. Thank you, Barbara. Dee, I'll move over to you now and ask you about how you came to be doing the work that you're doing, and you know, why it's important to you. You're going to need to unmute yourself, Dee. Yeah.
Thank you. Really, it's about education, about pleasure. I think we have lots of information about sex and sexuality, but really an opportunity to talk and discuss what is arousal, what is pleasure, what does pleasure look like, and the diversity and range of experiences that we can have in pleasure. For me, you know, it's been a long journey. I spent many years living in England, studying and everything else. And when I moved back to Ireland, maybe 15 years ago, I realized that there really wasn't any workshops that I wanted to go to there, or any learning opportunities. So I was constantly traveling to different places, and Sarah introduced me to some amazing things. What happened was I was getting flights and going to different countries to learn, and I thought, wouldn't it be great if there was a space in Ireland for this to happen? So I trained in 2015 in sexological bodywork, and left my job with the Health Trust to become a full-time practitioner and educator in sexuality. And every year I go back and support the training. And after I got a space right in the city of Belfast, which was really important to me, the city that I grew up in, and a city that you know, has had a history of conflict and you know, strong religious overtones in the education. It was really important for me to have a space there and bring practitioners and teachers like you've been there, Steph, Catherine, you've been there, Barbara, you're so welcome, and really connect with incredible educators in this field, and bring people to my home country to generate an ability to have conversations, and like you said, about self-expression, freedom to really play and be creative about what's possible in our amazing bodies. We have the most incredible bodies. And I was thinking about breath work, because I go to your Saturday, you know, your Zooms that you've been doing every Saturday morning. Great fun. And I was thinking, like, when was the first time that I recognized sexuality was absent? And I remember about 10 years ago, I did a Vipassana retreat, you know, like a meditation retreat, where the focus is on the breath for 10 days. And every time we did a body scan, they were leaving out the genitals. And I was thinking, no, they're definitely there. I can really feel my genitals, and the more they were being ignored, the more they were like looking for attention. And I was wondering how everyone was just not going, no, there's definitely lots of sensation and nerve endings there. And that's, you know, I'm a big fan of yoga and everything else, but they do leave out really important fundamental parts of our bodies that, like you say, we're all created from, and we all live on this earth with. So there's education to be done there, and I love mixing modalities. So Body Conscious is the name of my studio, and I basically work alongside a lot of mainstream therapists who offer different embodiment workshops, massage, embodied counseling, psychotherapy, craniosacral, all different modalities. And I work with sexuality, so I'm running sexuality workshops there and bringing amazing teachers there, and that feels really about integrating sexuality into mainstream. Feels like exactly where it should be.
Yeah, thank you, Dee, because of course they're not separate. You know, as you say, we're holistic beings. You know, everything is connected, and the more we ignore something, the more our awareness goes to that place as well. So yeah, thank you for your story and for sharing. And I know that also Sarah took an amazing leap out of mainstream work into following this passion and purpose. So yeah, thank you. So I'm going to come to Katie and then Kian and Sarah, and also just ask you a little bit about how you came to do the work that you're doing, and you know, why you love it so much, why you're passionate about it.
Hi, yeah. Well, Sarah and I, we both started our Tantra training, was it 14 years ago? So we were together right at the beginning of that, going into all kind of altered state experiences. And I come from a psychotherapy background. And so for me, I needed safety, and I needed codes of conduct. And I quickly realized that that didn't exist in the anarchic Tantra world that we entered into. But I feel very glad of those out at sea experiences. I feel very glad that we found ways of navigating that. And then Sarah and I, again, we entered into Kadoshka, into shamanic sexuality. And I was learning all this while that when we connect with Eros, there is deep healing that can happen. And I understand now that Eros, and we have a lust emotional command system, it's in service of integration of exiled parts of ourselves. And breath, breathing, expands consciousness, brings, opens up memory in the body for us to feel more of ourselves. And through the erotic charge, we have a stronger chance of either going out at sea and losing ourselves, or integrating and becoming empowered. And it's that fine balance when we are playing with fire, when we are playing with Eros and breath and expansion of consciousness, because it involves updating identity. And in that process, and then the shame can come in, as you know, that I've had plenty of tantric experiences where I've thought the next day, oh my God, did I do that? You know, that's not me. Oh my God, I'm a psychotherapist. So, you know, I've learned to be kinder with myself, as, you know, updating these different exiled parts of myself that I've integrated through shameless activity to heal shame in this journey that we're all on for, you know, towards becoming shame-free and at home with our sexuality.
I feel that in my body when you were speaking then, that shamelessness had a charge, the thought, you know, like you say, we can carry these things. And I'm really glad you put that beautifully, and I'm really glad actually that you've already brought in integration, because I'd like to come back to that afterwards, the importance of integrating our experiences and how we can do that and settle the nervous system again, which of course we can still use the breath, but many other things. Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, and just one more point here. One of the reasons why sexuality is so red hot in all professions really, is because most of our associations with sexuality are partner engagement, and that is completely the forbidden zone for any practitioner-client relationship. And that's one of the aspects of sexological bodywork that supported me to create a practice where there are codes of conduct, where we work outside of partner engagement. And because we've traveled with our own sexuality, we've traveled with our own eros, we're no longer triggered into romantic engagements with people. We can work with strong arousal and not go offline ourselves, because our training is to train us to expand our resourcefulness, to have response flexibility. We learn erotic fluency and emotional fluency through all of our different practices. In Tantra and in sexological bodywork. And we train practitioners with those skills, those necessary skills, which other professions don't necessarily have that training to work with those ecstatic states or those intense states of being.
I was actually looking at your code of conduct last night because I want to plagiarize some of it for my breathwork code of conduct. So I'd said to Sarah, I need to speak to Kian and Katie to see if they can, if you're comfortable with that, which I'll come to anyway. But again, ethics, boundaries, consent, all of that stuff, so important. Thank you, Katie. I'm going to move to Kian and then to Sarah to ask a little bit about, again, how you came to be doing the work you do.
Thank you. I remember being interested in sexuality from a very early age. As a child, it's something I explored freely, as many children have that opportunity. And I was brought up in a family that's, we're Danish, and there's a very liberal kind of 60s attitude still going on. My father started 2 communes, and my mother was a radical feminist. So before I was 10, I was reading Kinsey and Our Bodies, Ourselves and Nancy Friday. It's just something I enjoyed playing with. And I kind of taught myself some things by finding books on sexual magic and Tantra. And then I had an idea that I wanted to work with people who didn't have access to such pleasurable state so easily, but I didn't really have an idea of how to do that. And then in '94, I found Body Electric, which was started by Joseph Kramer, who worked with Annie Sprinkle and Barbara Krillis, I believe, or around that time, pioneering ecstatic breathwork and erotic massage. And that kind of galvanized a way that I could start to bring these things together and play with it and work with people and in a structured and educational way. And then the sexological bodywork and somatic sex education has brought it to another level. And along with a lot of other professions, we've been becoming more trauma informed and more finding ways to work with sexuality and trance states that are more contained and more balanced, which I think is very exciting.
Yeah. I mean, wonderful. Like, you had the polar opposite childhood to mine. But what I wanted to take from what you just shared was like how never underestimate for any of us the fact that we can reach people and touch people, because you found Body Electric, you found places where you could go and expand your learning. And this is, I believe, what we're offering. And sometimes against all odds, it can feel like it's really difficult, particularly when our networks and platforms are being taken down and censored, not just because of the frustration about the work that we invest in that, but more the frustration of the kind of misguided, like mono approach to intimacy, sex and pleasure that comes out through those, and how people just allow all of this really actually aggressive and violent stuff that's got this under context that isn't conscious at all. So yeah, thank you, Kian. I'm really glad that you had that background and that you do the work you do. And Sarah, obviously, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So I often say, people say to me, well, you must be doing this work because you're amazing in bed. And it was like, well, actually, it's exactly the opposite reason why I got into this work. And it was through my challenges and traumas and just being terrified of sex and all these different things. And I remember when I first did Tantra for a couple of years, people kept talking about the breath. And I was like, but I breathe 24/7. It's just not important. And I so dismissed it in my sort of youth. And then when I started to explore it, it was just like this magic key that just opened up so much. And I can remember going to Arizona and seeing this woman do the energy breath orgasm. I was just like, I want some of that. And, you know, the breath has just been so significant in my journey. And I just love it. And with clients, it's just so incredible. It's just the most magic key to work with. And so I'm just loving all these breathwork practices that are just coming more and more into the mainstream. And to have this conversation today with sexuality, it's really juicy.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, obviously I see your work up close and personal, and it's amazing. All of you inspire me. Everybody on this screen is really, really inspiring, and I'm so proud of the work that we're doing and the things that we've overcome to do that, whether that's cultural adversity, whether that's personal adversity, or whether it's in the collective, you know, which is basically what we're working with. But what I'd love to know now, especially, you know, Barbara and Catherine, you know, you have so much experience behind you. And I'm wondering if we could open the conversation slightly as to why any of us may think that these things don't come up in more mainstream practices. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because, you know, a little bit of experience can be a dangerous thing. And there may be facilitators that are bringing things in who don't have the training or the experience or the capacity to hold those parts and create that sense of safety, or who don't have an understanding of ethics, boundaries, and consent. So have you seen that happening in your work, or is there anything that you'd like to say to speak to that?
I could speak to that. It's one of my passions in my work is to try to help people understand the nervous system responses as deeply relational, and how in doing our own personal healing, we will access erotic energy because, like, being contracted, being traumatized, being in the dominant culture that has all its rules and punishments and prescriptions and prohibitions for how we're sexual and how we're gendered and how we do the erotic. Once we relax our bodies, our somas, our souls, we're going to access more erotic aliveness. And if we do that, like, without a sense of the need for both like safety and safe enough challenge within our bodies, our nervous systems, and also within our cultural body, our relational environment, then there's going to be the same domination, exploitation, bullying, power over paradigms that have wounded us in the first place. And as a person, like, going through my healing journey, I encountered all these people like appointing themselves as sexual healers that were really re-traumatizing people, including myself. You know, I experienced that. But, you know, as difficult as that was, it was also like a call to the work that I do as a teacher of somatic sex education to really guide people into understanding the neurobiology and the practices of, like, secure attachment and how to resource ourselves and create relational environments where sexuality of all kinds and the gender galaxy and all the ways that it's possible to be sexual, whether alone with our breath or in erotic community, that they're all welcomed and celebrated and cultivated in safe enough and exciting enough ways.
Absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much. Yeah, what a wonderful explanation. Yeah, I find myself longing and yearning for more of that, you know, really deeply, wanting that space where people can bring the whole of their erotic self, or can start to discover and open up to that in safe ways as well. So thank you. And Barbara, how was that for you in the course of your work?
I was relating very much, or pinging very much with what Dee said about, for example, yoga classes where, where's the genitals? Did I lose them? And of course, the more we don't deal with them, the bigger they get. And why do people in healing professions or health and wellness professions just drop sexuality out of it? Well, I think it's because sex is really scary. It's unpredictable, it can be loud, it can be messy, it can be wild, it brings up crazy feelings and thoughts we've never had before because we've repressed them. And culturally, we are all conditioned to be terrified of sex. It's how the culture gets us not to engage in it more. So that's just in the cultural DNA. Sex is scary. So as such, very few people are trained how to deal with it, particularly those in traditional healing professions. So they do their best to keep it repressed, because if it expresses, they do not know how to deal with it, because as Katie says, the whole partner thing comes up. It's like, whoa, we shouldn't be in this relationship. And no one's been taught, as Katie said, how to hold it. So the fact that people who don't know how to hold it don't hold it is actually probably a good thing. Until people, I've just had this conversation with some people in Finland. And we think of Scandinavia and we go, oh, what Kian said. But in Finland, in like the psychotherapeutic professions, in the healing professions, they're probably even more touch anxious than perhaps in America or other places. And we were having this conversation, and what we were saying is, until people are safely trained to hold the erotic, they can probably do more harm than good. But then we get into breath work. The breath work, natural, it's like air meeting fire. Air meets erotic energy, fire, and boom! And wonderful things transform in that blaze. And how do we prepare people to deal with just that much of the erotic? They're not actually dealing with erotic massage, sexological body work. It's just how do we hold the presence for the erotic to express without everybody freaking out? Mm-hmm. It is a combination, to be quick about it, too late, Barbara, of experience, caution, ethics, containers, and courage to just sit with it and go, I don't know how the fuck to deal with this, but I can sit here. If you can only just get to the point where I don't know how the fuck to deal with this, but I can sit in it, you can help people.
Yeah, beautiful. And this is where conversations like this one start to make these connections, like the networks that we all become aware of the things that we face, the things that provide the challenge, the things that are the issues, and the things that offer the solutions as well. Because we can all learn from each other if we can have the conversation, or as you say, if we can sit with it and just allow it to be there. And I love that analogy of air and fire you just gave. I'm like, oh, okay, right, okay. I can see some breathwork sessions starting to percolate and brew up there. And I had a feeling that, thank you, Barbara, that perhaps Katie, Kian, Dee, or Sarah, you may have a response to some of those things that have come up, you know, around, because we're talking about the why this doesn't get addressed, and what's already come in is that kind of sense of re-traumatizing from inexperience, or people not able to sit with it in themselves. So and yet I want the floor to be open for people. You've got something to...
It's just as Barbara said at the end there about that it's okay. I've had so many conversations with doctors, therapists, yoga teachers, all sorts of different people who don't feel comfortable with this area, but they think they have to really know everything or be the expert or have had a training. And just to say it's okay not to know, and you can still hold the space, you can still bring that into the framing, is often such a relief. Just that alone. So I'll just say that for people who are listening, that it's okay not to know and to know you don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah, what you said, Barbara, and what you've just said, Sarah, it's acceptance. It's the capacity to bear witness with another person's experience, no matter what that experience is, to hold space, to bear witness, and to accurately attune without trying to make it better, without trying to do something with it, but the bearing witness. And we don't need to know anything, really, if we can just accurately, with attunement, bear witness to another person's experience. And that's what that's what body poem has as a modality, is a way of bearing witness. So we have body poem as part of our sexological bodywork sessions, and Kian and I, we taught body poem together with a trauma training we did a few years ago. And it's a way of just bearing witness, where the practitioner or the body worker simply repeats back exactly in the same words what the person who's having the experience is experiencing, without trying to change it or do anything with it, in their language. Sorry about the dogs. Yeah, acceptance. I'll mute myself now with the dogs.
Thank you, Katie. And that links into, in my breathwork training, the foundation of the training, because Ray and I, my co-teacher, we founded the training because we'd been through our own training, and then we delivered teaching for another breathwork school. And we really felt that what was missing was presence. So we root our breathwork training in the ability to be present and to be that witness, which obviously means being present and witnessing ourselves, knowing ourselves so well that we know when we're activated, we know when something's happening, and staying in that space of awareness, and bringing that through. And the other aspect that we really wanted to bring into our training was also around all the stuff that we're talking about, which, we had, some of you may know Sue Newsome. She comes in and delivers a module on ethics, consent and touch, because that wasn't even addressed in our training. So you've got people who are releasing trauma in a breathwork session because the air is meeting the fire and it's all coming up, and then unskilled facilitators were going in with kind of really either clumsy touch or awkward touch or freezing because they didn't know how to deal with it. And so it was kind of like, okay, so we need to really address the ethics and consent. We need to really address the presence, the anatomy and physiology, and we really need to speak to the psychology of trauma. So we also have a guest teacher who specializes, she's a trauma psychologist. I have a sense that some of our things might open up and start to invite some of you guys in as well. I hope so, because I want all of these areas to come in. It's embodiment, and in order to be embodied, yes, we have to be the witness and we have to be present. So, thanks, Katie, for bringing that in. I'm aware that when Kian or Dee unmute, the dog may still be barking, but we'll take our chance with that. Do either of you want to add anything? Kian?
Yeah. So it's wonderful hearing what's been shared. I was reflecting that when sexuality is not addressed directly or explicitly, then it's still there and it'll still often well up and they manifest in some way. The experience I had with talking to some professional bodies about this in the worlds of psychotherapy and counselling was that their only context for, apart from talking about sexuality, the only context for touch or for more interactional expression was abuse, because that's the definition of their code of conduct. That's completely off the table. And they were not able to conceive of a context where you could have touch or coaching or support that might involve touch, and that wouldn't be abusive. So it's just completely out of there. They couldn't picture that. So there's probably room for dialogue with explaining more or talking about how this could be a possibility and how that might be approached.
And I'm guessing that that's probably something that we see actually across the world, in many cultures and countries, and lots of different facets and aspects. And I realized I mentioned that you were in the US, Catherine, but you're not, you're in Canada. So apologies for that, because that's where your work is based. Yeah. Dee, did you want to add anything?
What's coming up for me here is how we reinforce shame through not recognizing sex and sexuality as an intrinsic part of ourselves, and we all have a duty to have open and honest communication around that. Because I'm in agreement with Kian. That's whenever, you know, the shadow and, you know, difficult circumstances, because if we ignore it and it's there, it's just, you know, becomes even more difficult. Yeah, so shame. And I love, Catherine comes and teaches amazing 6-day intimacy educator training in Ireland. And I love your words, Catherine, when you call a massage a donut massage. A regular massage is a donut massage because it leaves out the piece in the middle. And as certified sexological body workers, we are reclaiming the genitals as a place where we can experience joy and pleasure safely in a context outside romantic or relationship arousal. So it's really about, you know, bringing more awareness into that area, more open conversations, and for me, that's what conscious sexuality, you know, involves, really opening up these conversations. And yeah, just thank you to each of you for the work that, you know, the tireless work that each of you do in this field. It's just incredible, and so important.
Thank you, Dee. And I'm just noticing the time. We've only got about 5 or 6 minutes left if we're going to honour your time, which I really want to do. So I'd love to ask each of you whether there's anything that you want to sum up with around how we can do that and continue to open this dialogue, or what you think might be needed in these different fields, you know, because we've all got different fields of practice, but all come through the body without exception. And so maybe you may all have some little pearl or contribution or thing that you'd hope for, even, you know, from this, even the evolution of the work and the practices, from the marrying of the practices. What might you be looking for?
Well, I could say just the understanding, like as breathers, as conscious breathers, that when we bring the breath down into the lower part of the body, we're actually massaging our genital nerves, all the nerves of the genitals, with our breath. It's like our inner lover, and it's that innocent. So to understand like the innocence and the delight and the pleasure of just breathing, like arousing our sexuality, it's like, oh wow, it doesn't have to be according to a cultural script. It doesn't have to involve a partner. It doesn't have to mean like that because I feel arousal, I need to find an orgasm or marry this person that I'm standing beside, or like nothing needs to happen except that you can just hold the delight of an aroused body.
I'm going to borrow that inner lover. The breath is the inner lover. That was just delicious. I could really feel that, and you know, and bringing the breath to all of those nerve endings and receiving an inner massage as well. Super beautiful. Thank you. Anybody else, anything that they'd like to say around, you know, the breath, or, you know, your hope for opening this dialogue more going forwards?
I'm going to follow on from what Catherine said, because that concept of the breath as the inner lover, for practitioners who are either by license or by lack of training, different training, not necessarily lack, the way they're trained, aren't comfortable with touch or aren't allowed to touch, if they could just teach themselves back to the holding it, how to create a container where they can let the client access, use that inner lover to have a dialogue with themselves that the practitioner could then support. In other words, the flame of the erotic is present, it's doing its work, and everybody's safe, comfortable, boundaried, and held in a loving container where no one feels out of honor, out of ethics, and no one gets re-traumatized.
Mm. Mm. Thank you. Deep breath to that. Yeah.
Mm.
Thank you so much. I mean, this is such a big conversation, isn't it? It's so big. It's just like there are riches to be mined on many, many levels. Dee, Katie, Kian, go ahead.
I feel like a prerequisite to working with sexuality for me is an understanding of individual sovereignty, and what's in my domain, not overstepping to somebody else's. So I really like working with the wheel of consent with that, my way of working with it.
Yeah.
Which doesn't have to involve sexuality. And breathwork is such an amazing tool for bridging working with sexuality, because it doesn't have to involve anyone else, like Catherine was saying, Barbara. It's like when I'm doing breathwork, it's my body, it's my inherent experience.
Beautiful, really beautiful. Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you brought in the wheel of consent. Sarah and I were discussing that at the foot of Glastonbury Tour earlier today, actually, with a little diagram and going around it and seeing how things work. So, you know, it's such a clear and straightforward map, and again, with lots more on the outside to go into, but thank you, Kian.
Yeah, on that note, the wheel of consent supports us all to have small experiences with reflection, with very, very clear agreements about what we're doing and what we're entering into. And that's the way to enter into altered states of consciousness, is with having contained, clearly agreed, co-created experiences where enoughness is noticed, and nobody's going to go into tolerating or enduring or overtaking. You know, so as Kian was saying, an understanding of what's in my domain and what's in the other person's domain.
Yeah, beautiful, exquisite. I love that idea of small experiences as well. You know, really, that's what I say to people in the breath work. Don't go digging and pushing and seeking, just open and allow. And, you know, sometimes the most profound experiences come from just a soft tear that will fall at the end of 30 minutes of breathing, where you suddenly realize that you've let something go and you may not even know what it is, but usually it becomes apparent. So thanks, Katie. And Dee and Sarah, if there's anything that you want to close with, you're very welcome.
Yeah, just for me, just to say, for people out there, especially practitioners that may be listening, is just not to be afraid of this area and to take some steps because it's just the most incredible journey, however deep you go. But having that conversation, reaching out to one of us, picking up an amazing book, just looking at this area of your life is and it may only be a little bit that you need, because, you know, when Steph frames her breathwork sessions, what's wonderful is she'll frame it in, you know, whatever happens is welcome here, arousal welcome, whatever's welcome, and just gives that permission to bring everything. And it's just so simple, the steps that we can take. It doesn't need to be a massive training or anything, but just to take the steps and not have the fear around it.
And I think for me personally, just adding to that, I bring that in because I know I can hold it. And I've heard people talk about that in the past, that you can only really call in what you have the capacity to hold. Otherwise, you're creating immediately a less safe space. You could even say dangerous sometimes, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Dee, you have the closing words if you want them.
It's been amazing just to hear the wealth of experience this evening, and just to be part of it. It's such an important conversation, and hopefully just the beginning of more beautiful work and unfolding and conversations. Steph, thank you so much for your invitation this evening. I've really enjoyed hearing from all of us, and you know, let's use this as a platform for more amazing conversations and opening doorways and possibilities.
Thank you. Thank you for your softness and strength and playfulness and everything. And for all of you, you know, it's been a delight for me, a really important and rich conversation. And, you know, if anybody wants to get back together or something comes up and you go, hey, let's talk about this, I'm completely open to continuing the dialogue. Thank you for giving your time and energy so generously. I have absolutely been inspired. So on that note, have a beautiful evening, everybody. Blessings.